Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Glad you could join me once again. So, just a quick reminder, as always, to everybody who is here with us in the chat. Hi, everybody. Hi, Kara. Glad you could make it. Hi, Dana. Hi, Kirok. Hi, Black Body Economics. Hi, Some Random Geek. Hi, everybody who's with us in the chat. As always, I will be answering questions that were submitted ahead of time by my wonderful Patreon patrons and channel members. So, if you are with us in the live chat, and thank you, Geek. I am on time this time. It's worth noting. 255 AD, did I get your question? I think I did. When did you send it in? I'm pretty sure. I can't remember if I got a question from you or not, but if you sent it in. Let me see. Yeah, I got it. Let me double check. Yeah, I got it. Anyway, thank you all for being here. I'm going to be answering questions that were sent in ahead of time by my Patreon patrons and channel members. So if you have anything for me in the live chat, once I start answering the patron questions and the member questions, please, if possible, hang on to it until I get through all of the patron and member questions, especially if you have like a super chat or you're going to be generous in some way, because I would hate, I'll go back and check the super chats if any came in while I was answering the patron and member questions, but, you know, I like to respond to them in a timely way. So, you know, hold on to it for later if you possibly can. If not, then, you know, let her rip, and I'll catch up when I turn to the chat. But anyway, let's start answering the patron and member questions, shall we? And the first one this time comes from our old friend David Colby, the Benjamin Sisko of Twitter. How about that? It's because I'm always committing crimes, but people love me anyway. Ah, there you go. That makes sense. See, I like that. There's like a, you know, there's a logic to it. Anyway, so I have a proposed rewrite for a scene in Strange New Worlds. It goes like this. Chapel. So that's what happened. Pike. Okay. La'an, as head of security, can you get me the recording of Ambassador Dakra and Dr. Mbenga's fight? La'an. Of course, sir. It's well established that this ship is full of security cameras and sensors. You'd have to be some kind of drooling moron to forget that. And doubly so for a highly important facility like the medical deck. Why, only some kind of absolute cretinous idiot would forget that our ship has security cameras, a feature so expected that it was a major plot point in 1968. Anyway, I'm going to go and get this video evidence right now. Chapel. Then the next scene is Chapel and Dr. Mbenga being executed by firing squad for murdering a Federation ambassador and attempting to cover it up. Then Pike turns to the camera and says, and this is the Prime Universe too. You got me with the last bit. You know what? If you were writing for a show, like if I was the showrunner of Strange New Worlds and you were on the writing staff and you pitched me this whole thing, it would have been a solid, hard no right up until Pike breaking the fourth wall and saying, and this is the Prime Universe too. Then I would have been like, you know what? Go for it. Go for it. Because I know the Trekkies will hate it. The Thinking Cat, with the writer's strike, even if it ends by November, spoilers, it will have created a large hole in the film releases and production. So if cinemas are going to re-release movies, what would the 10 movies you've already wanted to see at the cinema on big screen? I mean, I am not much of a going to the movies type person these days. I haven't been since the pandemic, and I have only actually gone to a movie theater to see a movie 3 times since COVID. So, I mean, there's really nothing that I didn't get to see before that I would be like, oh, if they re-release it, I would definitely, you know, I would run right out and see it. So, I mean, I'm not really the right person to ask the question. I'll tell you what, though, I did just this past week, I saw that Across the Spider-Verse was available to rent, the sequel to Into the Spider-Verse. And so I rented that on Amazon and watched it. And I think that would be a really good one to see on the big screen because, I mean, like in terms of the story, in terms of the writing, it was not nearly up to the standard of the first one, like not even close. But visually, it was stunning. Like visually, it was every bit as good as the first one, if not better. Like just on a purely visual, artistic level. I mean, it seems like the kind of movie that if you saw it on a big screen, it would just completely blow your mind. So that might be one that I would entertain going to see on the big screen, just to see if. And again, I didn't not like the movie. I thought the movie was good. I enjoyed it, but I mean, Into the Spider-Verse is a classic, and this one just isn't. But visually, it was remarkable. So I mean, maybe that one. Maybe I would go see Across the Spider-Verse on the big screen if they re-released it to fill gaps in the schedule. And of course, you know, you mentioned if the strike is settled by November, the writer's strike is over, baby, and the WGA won. Good for them. Now we just need to settle the actors' strike on with the same sort of terms so that SAG-AFTRA can win just as big as the WGA did. And then won't those poor saps in the Directors Guild, won't those poor saps in the Directors Guild feel bashful for not striking and getting an even better deal than the one they got back in May or June? Anyway, yeah, Across the Spider-Verse, we'll give that one a shot. I mean, I think you said 10. Yeah, you said 10 movies. That's ridiculous. I'm not naming 10 movies. I'll give you one. Eldridge Prime, could you do an analysis of DS9's Move Along Home that is just your POV? I see the one you did with another person. I believe that would be Dana. I guess you must be talking about our live stream that we did where we did the watch along with that episode a while back. But I got about 15 minutes into it, and it just didn't get very far into your thoughts. It is actually one of my favorite DS9 episodes. I look at it from the POV of being an RPG and board gamer, so while other folks were apparently confused by the story, it made perfect sense to me. I'd actually love to play Chula. It would be a 5-person team. I mean, I am not really a gamer at all, and I am definitely not a role-playing gamer, so I don't look at it that way, but I understand why people would, you know, because the characters are literally compelled to play a game, so it's not like that's a completely out of left field interpretation of the episode. It's a fairly obvious one. But even as someone who is very much not a gamer, I like that episode too. I don't know. I mean, you never know. I'm going to review it at some point with my retro reviews. It's not on the schedule right now for the foreseeable future, but I'm going to review it at some point soon. And I mean, I've always really enjoyed Move Along Home. I've never understood the degree of animosity that is directed toward it. Like it's. Am I ever going to say that it's like as good of an episode as Far Beyond the Stars or In the Pale Moonlight or my personal favorite, The Visitor, or Past Tense or The Ship or any number of other fantastic episodes that Deep Space Nine produced throughout its run, you know, Duet, right? I mean, there's so many fantastic Deep Space Nine episodes. And do I think Move Along Home deserves to be ranked among those? No. But I really, really enjoy it. I really, really like it a lot. I'm a big fan of Joel Brooks, who is the one of the big guest stars in it, who plays the head Waddy guy who, you know, brings the game in the first place. I think he's fantastic and really funny in that episode. So, I mean, I like the episode a lot. I don't know if I would not rank it as like an all-time great episode of Deep Space Nine, but I enjoy it thoroughly. And if you are particularly interested in it from the gamer angle, I completely get why you would find it fascinating because, yeah, I mean, it's the characters are literally playing a game. They're playing like a board game that you want. It's like a life-size board game, basically. So, I get it. But yeah, but I like it a lot. I like it a lot. It's a really, really fun episode. And I do not understand the vitriol that is directed toward it. Black Cover 95, who thinks episode 135 of the Ensign's Log should have started shortly before the memory wipe rather than after. Maybe it might have been more interesting. Take it up with Jason, but, not too strenuously. He has a heart condition. I hear Biden is siding with the union demands at the United Auto Workers strike. I commend him for his decision, but I remember the time he voted against the interests of striking rail workers, and he hasn't weighed in much on the WGA or SAG-AFTRA strikes as far as I know. Does such a man really deserve to be remembered as the country's most pro-union president? How do we go about this in online discourse without losing the nuances of the matter? Well, I mean, there's a couple of things to point out there. First of all, a president can be inconsistently pro-union, as I think Biden has been, and still be the most pro-union president. I mean, it's not necessarily that high of a bar. Like, who is a more pro-union president that you can think of than Joe Biden? I mean, maybe there are one or two, but it's not a long list. I mean, I feel like Biden at least has a strong claim to the title. If for no other reason than he is very outspoken and unashamed about the fact that he does support the unions and he does think of himself and present himself as a pro-union guy. And yeah, you're right. He hasn't always acted pro-union, unfortunately, but in terms of the image he presents, he very much wants to be known as a pro-union president, and he does not run from that perception. He runs right at it. Says, no, I want to be known as the union guy. I believe in unions. I support unions. So I don't think it's completely unreasonable to think of him that way, or even for him or his campaign to present himself that way. And as for the rail workers strike, I mean, I've heard conflicting reports about that. I was disappointed in him about that at the time, because it did seem like he sided against the union and sided for the companies and for the sake of just, not having it be disruptive and for keeping the railroads running. And I was not a fan of him for that. But since then, I've heard conflicting reports. Some people have said that after the strike was settled, Biden and his administration continued lobbying the railroad companies on behalf of the union after the strike was settled, and eventually the union got most of what it was striking for. So in the long run, the union actually won, even though it appeared that the strike was ended prematurely. But then again, I've also heard from people who say, no, that's overblown, or they didn't get as much as it's, being said that they got, or there are still lots of railroad workers that are, working in unacceptable conditions, and it's actually not as much of a win, or not a win at all. So I don't know. I've heard people say that after Biden came down and said, settle the strike, that he continued, negotiating on behalf of the workers, and they eventually got most, or at least a good deal of what they were asking for when they were going to strike. So I don't know, but I don't think the idea of Biden as an especially pro-union president, or even the most pro-union president, is all that outrageous of a claim. Ben Douglas, hi Steve, longtime listener, first-time caller. What are your thoughts on the potential existential risks presented by artificial intelligence? On the one hand, it sort of feels like alarmism from people who have watched Terminator too many times. On the other hand, I have trouble finding actual flaws in the argument that we don't seem great at keeping AI from having weird, unexpected behaviors, and that if there's something vastly more intelligent than us that doesn't want exactly what we want, then that's not a great position to be in. I don't really know what to think, because you sort of get at it in your question. The people who seem to be talking about it the most are the extremists. There are the people who say, "Oh, this nothing to worry about." It's, the people who say this is going to be a bad thing are just being hysterical, and it's going to be fine. And then there are the people that are like, "This is going to destroy us." Like, we cannot do this. This will be the worst thing ever. And it's hard to know. And the truth presumably lies somewhere in between those two extremes. But I don't have the, the training, the education, the context to even make a guess as to which one of those is more true than the other. So I don't really know. I will say in the near term, it feels like we're still a pretty long way away from developing that kind of legitimate, actual artificial intelligence that even could theoretically pose that kind of existential risk. So in the meantime, in the near term, I am much more concerned about the effects that large language models like ChatGPT, which we call artificial intelligence, but strictly speaking aren't really artificial intelligence, with the negative effects that they could have. For instance, that's something that we were just talking very briefly about the writer's strike a couple of questions ago. That's something that the writers, it was a major concession that the writers won when they settled the strike, was that they got protection against studios using AI without a writer's consent. They got it written into the new minimum basic agreement that a writer cannot be forced by a studio that hires them to work with AI material or to allow their material to be rewritten by an AI, or to be forced to rewrite material that was written by an AI. And if a studio wants them to rewrite material that was generated by an AI, they have to be upfront and tell them this was generated by an AI. They can't try to hide it or pass it off as a human's work. And and basically it'll be completely up to the writers whether they want to have anything to do with AI produced scripts or not. And AI produced content will not be considered, will not be considered writing under the terms of this agreement. So, that's the kind of thing that I'm more worried about. I'm more worried about AI as it exists at the level that it exists now being used to delegitimize actual workers, to take jobs and wages away from actual human workers, to make to try and render human workers obsolete or redundant or whatever, so that the companies that are doing it can save money and will have some excuse for not paying people. That's more what I'm worried about at this point than any kind of Terminator like doomsday scenario, but who knows? We'll see where it goes from here. Keith Parker: hey, Steve, one of the things I love about your videos is how, like me, you want to be told a good story. Digging a little deeper, though, do you have a particular type of story you enjoy most? In the realm of literary fiction, I am immediately drawn toward ordinary people in extraordinary situations. In science fiction, my favorite subgenre is the big dumb object category, Clark's Rama, Dan Simmons' Time Tombs, etc. What about you? I tend to gravitate toward character-driven stories. I like stories that are about interesting people or people in compelling situations. I can get into a more plot-heavy story if the plot is interesting enough, but I tend to be more susceptible to character-driven stuff. Show me an interesting person that I can come to care about, and that I will develop a rooting interest in them. I will want them to succeed at whatever they're trying to do. I will be invested in what happens to them. That I've said this many times. That, to me, for me as a writer and for me as an audience member, that is the key. If you can get me or the audience other than me to care about what happens next in your story, that's it. That's 100% of the job right there, right? Get them to care about what happens next. And to me, the best way to do that is get them to care about the people in the story. Get them to care about the characters. Get them to care about the protagonist. What happens next? What are they going to do? Are they okay? Did they make the right decision? Are they going to succeed? Are they going to fail? Are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Are they going to get what they want? Are they going to be denied? What if they're denied? What happens next? Like, that's it. If you that's how you hook an audience. That's how you tell a compelling story. But in terms of like actual themes or tropes or scenarios that tend to grab me, I don't know. I mean, um, I'm I love being made to laugh. If a story is funny, then that's gonna make it a lot easier for it to win me over. Um, I tend to react very strongly in a positive way to themes about friendship. Um, I know I've said this before too. Like if you one of the best ways to get me on board for your story is convince me that the characters in it actually care about each other. Like if you are showing me characters who are friends, who are being depicted as friends, if I believe that they really are friends, if I believe that they really do care about each other, that goes a long way with me. And these apply whether in whatever genre, whether it's literary fiction or a western or sci-fi or whatever. Like I find that it doesn't really make much of a difference to me in terms of the things that I attach to very strongly. You know, um, it doesn't make a difference what genre it is. But yeah, character-driven stuff, friendship-based stuff, and you know, just I like when I can see basic mechanics of storytelling being executed well. As I get older, I have much more appreciation for storytelling that if you just look at it, if you just map it out on a sheet of paper, would appear very formulaic. But when you're watching it, you don't notice that it's formulaic. It doesn't play as formulaic to you while you're watching it or reading it or whatever. I say watching because I tend to default to movies and TV. Um, but you don't notice it because it's so well executed. Because you're genuinely involved in the characters and the story that you're not thinking like, oh, there's the plot point at the end of Act One. You know what I mean? Like you don't. But upon reflection, you can look at it. If you have like a critic's eye like I have, you can look at it and go, oh, there we go. You can sort of break down the mechanics of the story, and it's as basic and simple and formulaic and by the book as you can imagine, but it still got you because it was so well executed. You know, I find I have an ever increasing appreciation for that sort of thing too. Wolfie Basach, bollocking, verb, vulgar slang, definition, a severe reprimand. Hi, Steve. This cautionary workplace tale occurred when a bloke I knew had recently met a new girlfriend. To spice things up one lunchtime, he decided to send her an email detailing his ideas for their next carnal encounter, but unintentionally sent it to his lady manager instead. He was immediately summoned to the office and promptly received what is widely regarded by those whose expertise excel in this area as the second greatest bollocking of all time. After such an ordeal, a lesser man would have been cowed, but he had guts of steel and proved it to his peers by accidentally doing it again that afternoon. And thus our hero was once more summoned to the office and promptly received what is widely regarded by those whose expertise excel in this area as the officially certified greatest bollocking of all time. So my question is, have you ever been on the wrong end of a good bollocking or even dished one out? I can't think of any examples of me either dishing one out or being on the receiving end of one. Like, obviously, I've fucked up and been yelled at before in my life. I've had people mad at me, but I can't remember any particular time where I just like got, just like got the third degree, where I just was, like just torn up one side and down the other because I had fucked up and somebody saw that I fucked up and they were like, you are going to regret that you fucked up. Like, I don't think that's ever happened to me. And I don't think I've ever had occasion to, inflict that on someone else. There was one time though, when I bore witness to one. And this was when I was in my late teens, maybe early 20s. And one of my really good friends had gone out somewhere with my younger brother, and my younger brother is 5 years younger than me. So I think if me and my friend were maybe 18 or 19, my younger brother was, you know, 12, 13, 14, something like that. Like, not like a little kid, but, you know, still young, and still young enough that like my parents would worry about him if he was out too late or if they didn't know where he was, that sort of thing. So my buddy and my little brother went out somewhere, and I can't remember where they went. They went out to a party or to someone else's house, or they were out late or something. I can't remember exactly what the specifics of the offense was, but he did something involving, you know, staying out too late or going somewhere that they weren't supposed to go with my younger brother. And when my buddy and my younger brother got back, and everybody was fine, like nothing bad happened, but it was just, you know, they were gone and my parents were worried, and then they came back. And my dad, we were all in my bedroom hanging out after they got home, or after my brother got home, and my buddy was there with us. And when my dad realized that they were home, he comes into my room, and and we were sitting on the couch just watching TV or something. And he walked up to my friend and kind of loomed over him. And he said, "You fucked up last night, didn't you, boy?" And meaning he stayed out too late, kept my brother out too late or something, you know, and everybody was worried. "You fucked up last night, didn't you, boy?" And then what followed was, I don't think my dad yelled. I don't think he raised his voice, but he was incredibly serious and incredibly angry, and basically let my friend know that he had fucked up, that it was unacceptable, that if he ever wanted to, you know, if he wanted to keep coming around here and hanging out with me, and he wanted to still be welcome in this house, that he could never do that ever again. And I mean, just really, you know, without like yelling and screaming and being like super scary, just, you know, let him know that he had really fucked up. And then my friend, you know, went home. And a little while later, my dad was in his workshop, which was my bedroom was in the basement at the time. And across the staircase was my dad's workshop, where he had a workbench, and he kept, you know, he would, you know, repair things and, you know, change the oil in the lawnmower. And it was like his domain. It was his shop. Right. And he was in there working on something. And I came out of my room and was going upstairs or something. And he saw me and, you know, asked me to come in. And he said, he asked me about my friend that he had just, you know, given the third degree to. And he said, you know, how was, I won't say his name, but how was so-and-so, you know, after I talked to him. And I said, well, I mean, he was, you know, he was pretty shaken up, because you can be kind of a scary guy when you get mad. And my dad said, and my dad has never said this to me before, he said, "Is he okay? Because I kind of went off on him." Like, he felt bad. My dad felt bad about, and I've seen my dad get way, way angrier than he got, like, in terms of like yelling and screaming and like being scary. Like when my dad, he's really mellowed out the last few years, but when my dad was younger and he was pissed off, I mean, it was scary. Like he would, you know, his temper would run away with him, and he was a scary, angry dude if he wanted to be, or if he was pushed to that, right? And he wasn't that way with my friend. I mean, he was mad, and he was serious, and he was making his point, but he wasn't like yelling and screaming and throwing stuff around and, you know, being physically threatening. But I guess because he was so angry and had been so serious, and he could tell that he had really, you know, shaken my friend up, you know, he actually came to me later and said, "Is he okay? Because I feel like I kind of went off on him." And he's never, before or since, I've never had him say that to me. I've never had my dad come to me later after he yelled at somebody or got mad at somebody or, you know, gave somebody a good talking to. I've never had him come to me after the fact and say, "Was that too much? Did I go too far?" So I've always remembered that one. But I fortunately was not on the receiving end of that one. Agent Meister, a king at Uruk. Shaka when the walls fell or something. Peldor Joy, Steve, cast your mind back to late October 2016, about a month before that braying jackass was elected president. I traveled from Ireland to Baltimore, Maryland, to run that city's marathon. I had a few hours to kill the day before, so I got the bus to Fort McHenry. No sooner was I off the bus when two F-22 fighter jets shot past me overhead. To my surprise, I had unwittingly stumbled upon a USAF air show where all sorts of planes going all the way back to World War II were strutting their stuff for all to see. Being from Ireland, this is not something I'd see every day, or ever for that matter, and I really enjoyed it. Given its location, it recently dawned on me that you might have been there, as I think you're into this sort of thing. I had yet to discover your channel, so I wouldn't have recognized you if you were there, but now I'd probably be a clingy and fanboy and ask you questions like, what's Jason really like? Or pester you for Dana's autograph. Only kidding, but does this air show ring any bells? No, and I definitely wasn't there. Actually, even though I'm a space nerd and a little bit of an aeronautics nerd, not nearly as much of like an airplane nerd as I am a space nerd, but I have a general interest in that sort of thing. The only air show I've ever been to in my life was one, when I was maybe 12. My dad and I went to an air show at Andrews Air Force Base, which is, relatively speaking, in the area. It's not over toward Baltimore, though. It's more down in the DC, Virginia area. So we went to an air show at Andrews Air Force Base. And I remember it being really cool. Like, I really had a good time and enjoyed myself. But it's not something I've ever felt drawn to go back to. So no, I was not there at Fort McHenry in Baltimore for that air show. I don't remember anything notable about it happening or anything in particular. But I'm glad you got to see it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I remember enjoying the one I went to. I thought it was pretty cool. And there were no crashes. Nobody died, which is always a plus when you're talking about an air show. It's like, oh, nobody died. Successful air show. Awesome. And, you know, as far as what's Jason really like, he's the worst. He's the worst. Michael Ridra, I know you are no fan of Lower Decks, but I was curious on your impressions of the most recent two episodes, the Horny Beta Zeds and Orion Wedding ones. I noted the writers have pulled way back on member berries in these two at least, and seem to be trying to be funny with actual jokes, gags, and silly situations. I anticipate that you still didn't find them very funny, but in comparison, did you find them at least closer to getting a chuckle out of you? I personally got a good laugh out of the running gag about knives in Mariner's shoulder in the Orion episode, and Dr. Tana's antics in the Beta Zeds episode. We have to stop Tana. She swore an oath not to eat her patients. Got an especially good chuckle out of me. Also, though this is a reference, I still got a good laugh at the Romulans apparently just lurking in the neutral zone all the time, just eagerly waiting for a Federation ship to cross it, and sulking when the Cerritos turns away at the last moment. P.S. Best wishes to Jason. I will pass those along to Jason, because Jason is just the best. Yeah, I see what you mean, that they've dialed back the fan service and the member berries this season. You're right. I still don't. I don't think the show is funny. And they throw in those little, you know, they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves with the you know, the nostalgia references. Like the most recent episode, they give Boimler a subplot where, you know, he's feeling pressure because he got promoted to Lieutenant JG, and there's a scene where he's in his quarters and he's trying to memorize the entire crew roster of the Cerritos. And there's a scene where he's like looking at a pad and he has their pictures and he's trying to name everybody. And it took me a second to realize what was going on. Then when I realized that he was looking at, you know, characters on this actual show, people that he actually served with on his ship, I was like, oh, that's nice. Like, they're actually having him do this with people that he actually works with on his ship, instead of having him try to remember the crew roster of, you know, Deep Space Nine, or do some other fucking, you know, like reference-based shit, right? And I thought, oh, that's nice. They had him, you know, he's actually doing it with people who are on his ship, characters that could actually show up on this show in a way that makes sense. And I was like, oh, cool. All right. You know, I mean, I didn't think it was funny, but it was like, oh, okay. You know, it's a gag that actually makes sense. That isn't just a pandering fan service thing. And then he had to go and do that fucking thing with Shax where they walk into a super secret security room and the first thing that you hear is a security officer doing a slam poem about fucking Worf. And I'm just like, oh, God damn it. Like, you can't fucking help yourselves, can you? You can't fucking help yourselves. You give one of your characters a subplot that at least is potentially maybe kind of funny. You know, like he's feeling anxiety about his promotion. It's the same fucking character arc that he's had since the start of the show, and they just keep repeating it over and over again, which is annoying. But you could do something with it, right? And it's like, nope. Here's somebody doing a fucking poem about Worf for some reason. People on a ship who none of them probably have even met Worf. But and there's really no reason why all of them would even know Worf or why Worf would be such a fucking legend to all of these people. Or Odo, there was a reference to Odo for no fucking reason at all other than we would recognize it. Like, it can't help itself. They can't, it's like, if they would declare a complete moratorium on that and say no more references to anything except stuff from our show that we made up, and then they actually worked on writing good, funny jokes, like, I have no doubt that it could be a funny show, but they just can't help themselves. They can't help themselves. They can't help but they're writing to a particular audience that has really connected with the show, and a lot of that audience just, if you mention anything from another Star Trek show, they're going to pop for it, and that just seems to be what they're aiming for most of the time, and it's a shame because I feel like the people who write for this show, and certainly the cast of the show, are capable of being very funny people. I've seen them be funny in other stuff. I know that they're funny people. But they go for the easy, the reference gag so often, and even when they don't need to, because they know that'll work. They know that as soon as that comes up, they have fucking, what's his name? Ransom, and was it Ransom and Shax? Who were in the fucking same the workout outfits, the aerobics outfits that Crusher and Troy wore in that one episode of TNG for no fucking reason at all, other than they knew that there would be fans in the audience who would see those and recognize them and go, ooh, and post on Twitter about it, like, and have a fucking orgasm over it. And that was good enough, I guess. That's a good enough gag, and like I say, it's disappointing. It's a shame because I do think there are obviously very talented people working on that show. But, if you have an audience, if you have a particular segment of the audience that will laugh at anything you do and you don't even have to fucking try, I guess that's tempting. And that's too bad. General Contact Unit Problem Child, you've been reviewing Q episodes. Do you think it's a problem that because he was popular with fans, the shows gradually started to treat him like a good guy, or at least an anti-hero, even though he was originally established as a total monster? Like in the episode where we meet his son, the final scene has him in Janeway's ready room laughing with her and her trying to appeal to his generosity to transport the ship home. The first time this dude appeared in TNG, he murdered a member of the bridge crew just to flex, but apparently Janeway, who we're told has read the reports of that shit, is cool to chat and laugh with him. Also, since I seem to have characters left over, I'll also ask, how surprised are you they didn't try to somehow put him in Enterprise like they did with the Borg and Ferengi? Now that you mention it, I guess I am maybe mildly surprised that they didn't try to throw Q into Enterprise just as a desperation move, to pop a rating or to try and generate some interest in the show. I guess I didn't really think about it at the time, but yeah, it is a little surprising because they tried everything else to try and get people to watch Enterprise, and they never really said, let's throw Q in there for some reason. They put Q on Voyager for that exact reason and got a really great episode out of it, and then brought him back a few more times, and it was like, oh, no, you should have just done the one. I agree with you. I think for the most part, Q and the Borg are analogous in this way, in that the more you use them, and it's not as much of a problem with Q because Q's appeal is a bit broader than the Borg. The Borg, I think, are the kind of villain where you can really only get away with using them a handful of times before they lose their appeal, because their appeal is so narrowly focused. And if you introduce the unbeatable foe, and then the heroes beat them, you've kind of shot your wad. Like, it's diminishing returns from there on in. With Q, it's not quite that simple, and Q, for the most part, was fine with his many TNG appearances. There really aren't that many bad Q episodes, unless you count season 2 of Picard. There's a few really terrible Q episodes in that. Depending on how you look at it, you could judge that whole season as one really, really awful Q episode. But in terms of like the shows from the previous eras, there's Encounter at Farpoint isn't a good show, and Hide and Q isn't a good show, and Q-less, the Deep Space Nine appearance, isn't a good show, and the last 2 Voyager episodes to feature Q are both not good shows, although the third one is better than the second one. But other than that, all of the Q episodes are pretty solid. So there are many more good Q episodes than bad ones, and some of the best Q episodes are some of the best episodes of TNG. Q Who is a fantastic episode. Tapestry is one of the best episodes TNG ever did. It's a classic among classics. So there are great Q episodes. But I do agree with you that there was sort of a well, it's like I said in my most recent review. A lot of fans tend to remember Q as like a teddy bear. It's like, oh, it's Q, And I have always felt that Q worked best as an antagonist and was also funnier when he did have an edge to him, when he was a bastard, when he reminded you occasionally through, one of his quips or through something he would do or through his callous attitude toward the suffering he caused, that made him a better character in terms of the humor and in terms of the threat that he represented to the characters. That, yeah, of course, you like Q because Q is funny and because Q is played by an incredibly charismatic actor who has fantastic comic timing and is just, an incredibly watchable, magnetic, disruptive, but in a good way, presence on the show. Of course, I love Q. Q's a great character. But you're not supposed to think that Q is a good person. And when they softened Q, when they took off his rough edges and they said, well, maybe he's doing this because he secretly really likes Picard and he just views humanity as like a pet, and occasionally he appears to do bad things, but it's only to help us grow and it's only for our own good. Like, that to me is not nearly as interesting as a mercurial, capricious, all-powerful, impish asshole who, occasionally will allow us to learn a lesson, or, he does things to make a particular point. But at the end of the day, he doesn't have our best interests at heart. He doesn't really care. He finds us interesting from time to time. He finds us entertaining from time to time. But he's like a cat playing with a mouse. That's the most interesting and most compelling version of Q to me. And when they sort of pivoted from that to, well, he secretly really loves us, or he's doing this for our own good, and actually he has a soft spot, and Q really believes in us. Like, that is so fucking boring, I cannot even tell you. And really just declaws that character to a fatal degree for me. So I do think it was a problem. And yes, you're right. That Janeway's reaction to him in that episode, given his past, where he has done really terrible things to people, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But my problem with it isn't so much that lack of continuity as it is just the changing nature of the Q character and making him just a far, far less compelling presence on the show. Isaiah Taylor. So, Steve, if you were in charge of the screenwriting process for the movie Star Trek Generations, what would you change? I've known that many Trekkies don't like Star Trek 7, and to be fair, I'm not much of a fan either after watching several years ago. Usually we differ on movies, but yeah, what would you change? Keep in mind the Enterprise D still gets destroyed, but what things would you change or keep? I have not really given it a lot of thought in terms of like plot specifics, I haven't come up with a treatment of an alternate version of Generations. But I have thought for many years that if, and I would say this would apply to me if I were, if I were touched by a magic wand and they said, you get to write Star Trek Generations over again and you can do whatever you want with it, as long as you still destroy the Enterprise at the end, and let's just assume that they can shoot whatever script you write. My thought process is if you can do a full-on crossover between Captain Kirk's Enterprise crew and Captain Picard's Enterprise crew, do that. Like, do a full-on crossover between like both ships and both crews. So you get not just Captain Kirk, but it's got to be Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Uhura and Scotty and Chekhov and Sulu, like the whole gang. And they interact with Picard's whole gang, right? And it's a full-on crossover movie. If you can do that, do that. If you can't do that, just do a TNG movie. Don't have any Captain Kirk stuff in it at all. Don't do a half-ass crossover. Don't do, Kirk and Scotty and Chekhov will be in it at the beginning, and then Kirk will come back at the end and he'll do some things with Picard, and then that'll be like, no, don't. If you can't do a real crossover where the two crews meet and have an adventure together that is a good story and makes sense and, passes the baton in some way that's meaningful or what, whatever. If you can't do that, then just don't even, because we've already had Star Trek 6. Star Trek 6 was the perfect farewell to those characters. There's no reason why we ever need to see any of those characters ever again, right? That was the farewell, and it was perfect. So if you're going to open that back up and bring them back, it had better be fantastic. Like, it had better be worth doing that. It had better be worth revisiting it and disturbing that perfect ending that they got. So if you can't do that, then just do a TNG movie. And I'm sure you can find other ways of exploring the themes of the passage of time and the nexus and time travel and regret over what happened in the past and the road not taken and all. You can tell a story centered on Picard that includes Soren and includes the nexus and includes maybe some elements of time travel or whatever without having Captain Kirk be involved in it at all. You can tell the same basic plot without the classic Trek elements, and you can still build up to a climax where the Enterprise D ends up getting destroyed somehow. If that's a plot point you're dead set on keeping. But yeah, that's what I would do. If you can't do a full-on crossover with the original cast, then just don't do it at all and just do a TNG movie. Oasis. Today, the media reported on the death of Senator Dianne Feinstein. While I have my own beliefs on whether she should have stuck around or not, I will keep those to myself. But I at least wanted to talk about a couple of the good things she did. She was one of the leading advocates of the assault weapons ban. She was also a good friend to the first openly gay man to be elected to office in California, Harvey Milk, who was assassinated in 1978. This is the Dianne Feinstein I will choose to remember. No question, just wanted to spend some time on this one. Well, and I appreciate that, and I agree with you. Look, I do not think that her reluctance or whatever reasons she had for wanting to continue as a senator until she died, I don't think we should allow those to tarnish her legacy as a senator, and before that as a mayor, and her whole political career, which lasted for decades and decades. I agree with you. She was a very important, very significant, very consequential figure in our politics over the last couple of generations, and she deserves to be remembered for that and to be celebrated for that. And the fact that, the last few years, a bunch of us were sitting around going, why is she still here? Why isn't she retiring? It seems like she's not doing too well. She should step down and let someone else take the seat. I don't think that, as frustrating as that was, I don't think that should overwrite her entire legacy. So I agree with you, and I appreciate you bringing those details up because they are very important. Shazy. Good evening, Steve. Could you please give me some advice on how to not be so fearful of confrontation? Treading the fine line between being assertive and imposing myself on others has been a challenge, especially when it involves people that I have known and interacted with for a long time. In the worst case, it leads to me ruminating on the event for a while, which tends to bring me to a dark place. I do know that I have the habit of catastrophizing, and my therapist has given me tips on how to deal with that. However, I would like to hear how you deal with such a scenario. Hope all is well. Thank you. I try not to think about it too much before or after. I mean, if I find myself in a situation where I need to, basically tell somebody like it is, like in a face-to-face way, I need to say, okay, look, you need to stop fucking around and do this, or you need to act right, or I need to stand up for myself and say, you can't talk to me that way, blah, blah, blah. Like, fortunately, I'm almost never in that situation. But if I am in the situation where I need to stand up to someone or put my foot down or whatever, which, I mean, it has happened a few times throughout my life, and it's never a comfortable situation, and I would much rather avoid it if I could. But when I felt like I had to do that, I try not to overthink it. I try to just go with it in the moment and say what needs to be said and be as firm and as strong as I can manage to be, or at least appear as firm and as strong as I can appear. And yes, of course, when it's over, I'll maybe be inclined to rake myself over the coals and say, like, oh God, why did you say that? Why didn't you say this? And no, they were probably laughing at you. They didn't take you seriously. You probably sounded like an asshole, or, they could probably tell that you were nervous and you didn't, or, I mean, I can, sort of beat myself up over it, but I just try not to do that. I mean, I try to, if the thought comes into my head and I start to think about it and get, feel embarrassed about it or feel ashamed about it or feel anxious over it, I just start thinking about something else. Sometimes I will literally shake things off. I will literally go like, and like literally shake it off and move on to something else. Think about something else, do something else. Like, I will move on with my day, with my life, and do something else to take my mind off of whatever happened that is distracting me or bothering me. That tends to work pretty well for me, but I acknowledge not everybody's brain works the way mine does. Like, I have always been fairly good at letting shit go. It might come up again. Like, if there's something that really bothers me or something that I'm really upset about, I might shake it off and do something else, and then it'll come back later like that. I have had that issue before. But I am very good at kind of pushing things off or moving on to something else or shaking something off and getting on with something that is less upsetting in the moment. But like I said, I understand it's not that easy for everybody. But fortunately, usually it is that easy for me. I think, okay, you know what, forget it, whatever, and move on to something else. Dataport Doll, evening, Steve. One of my partners is a sci-fi nerd, but had never watched an episode of Star Trek and wanted to start. For various, very scientific calculations, we started with Prodigy, and she enjoyed it. She picked the next series, and she chose Lower Decks. But an interesting thing occurred. I generally agree with you that Lower Decks is too reference-packed, but she is actually enjoying it much more than me, despite understanding zero references. A good example was the episode where Mariner does her serial killer holodeck therapy, which was crammed with every movie reference as if it was an order and not a parameter. My mind was distracted by callbacks, but she got to see funny gags. Was the true target audience the normies all along? Or have we too grown old that we are too smart to see the appeal? Regardless, I'm going to administer blood tests when I see her next, just in case. This kind of runs into something that I said back when, either during the first or the second season of Lower Decks, and I'm pretty sure I said this in a video, but maybe I didn't. But I know I've said it to people outside of one of my videos. I wonder if people who don't have the absurdly extensive knowledge of Star Trek that I have, or that a lot of us have, might enjoy Lower Decks more. because they wouldn't pick up on all the references and therefore they couldn't get annoyed by them. Now, there are people who do pick up on the references and love that shit. That's kind of what they want. They want references. They want member berries. That's what they crave. That's what they like. That's not me. I kind of resent that and find that pandering and insulting and lazy. I don't like it. But if someone had that same sort of attitude that I have and didn't like that kind of humor, but watched something that was full of that kind of reference-laden humor, but didn't get the references, they wouldn't be annoyed, right? Because they wouldn't recognize it as a reference. Or at least they wouldn't be as, you might, sometimes you can, even if you don't get the specific reference, you can tell by the way the joke is constructed or by the way it's presented that they are referencing something, like they are making some kind of callback that they're expecting you to get. And even if you don't get it, you can tell that's what they're doing. And that can be really annoying too. And that's annoying whether you get the reference or not. And Lower Decks does that a lot. But I've thought almost ever since the show debuted and I realized what the show was, I thought, I wonder if I would like this more if I didn't know so much about Star Trek. So your partner's reaction kind of makes sense, personally, I don't think I would find the show all that much funnier, but I might find it a lot less annoying. And I might be a lot less exasperated with it if I did not get all the references. Because that does really grind me down. You know what I mean? Like when I was responding to Michael's question earlier, I mean, it really, really just like when I see another reference to something that they just gratuitously throw in for no reason, or they do it in lieu of writing an actual original gag. And I'm just like, oh God, like, can you just not? Can you just fucking stop? But if I don't recognize the reference, I'm less apt to do that. So it actually makes sense. Now, do I think that the normies were the target audience all along? No, I don't think the normies were the target audience all along. I think the target audience are, the kind of people that would cram into the hall during Comic-Con to watch the new trailer for the next season of Lower Decks and watch all the Easter eggs and just scream and cheer and shit their pants with glee, with every single Easter egg. I think that's the target audience. But a person who isn't a Trekkie, liking it more than someone like me with my taste in comedy who is a Trekkie, that does make sense to me. That does make sense to me. Brian Baker, Steve, your recent videos about Fox News and exposure to racism were great. I also have been enjoying your essays on Q's appearances in Star Trek. I was wondering if you could go over your process for creating your work. How long does it take you to formulate a script, shoot a video, edit it, and post it? Also, I'm curious as to how long you ruminate over an idea before you sit down to write a script. Thank you and keep up the good work. It all really depends on the video, on the idea. Like, for instance, if I'm the most involved videos that I do on a regular basis these days are the Trek Actually videos, where it's either the main ones that my patrons and members choose the topic via the poll, or it's a one that I choose myself, but it's like it's specifically about a topic or a thesis or something. Those are usually the longest. Lately, those have been running between 30 and 40, sometimes 45 minutes. And so that's anywhere between a 15 to a 20-page script. So writing it can sometimes take most of a week, depending on how fast I am, depending on how inspired I am, depending on how sure I am about what I'm saying and where I want it to go. And what my work ethic is like that week, and how willing I am to just sit at the computer and bang it out. But yeah, writing one of those usually takes at least 4 or 5 days, sometimes more. And then, shooting it, actually setting up the camera takes maybe setting up the camera and the lights and stuff maybe takes half an hour. And then actually sitting in front of the camera and doing the script and shooting the video can sometimes take 40 minutes to an hour. sometimes longer, depending on how good I am on camera that day, and how many times I have to go back and redo something, how many times I flub a line and have to swipe backwards on the teleprompter and do it again, and how many times I have to change the camera battery, or if there's all kinds of little technical issues that can pop up here and there. And then editing usually takes another 2 or 3 days for one of those. So it usually takes about a week altogether. And I'm also I'm working on other stuff as we go along. Like I'm not just exclusively working on just that video the entire week. I'm probably, if I know I have one of those videos coming up that I need to do, I'm mostly working on that, but I'm also doing other stuff. I'm writing probably a shorter, simpler video for Monday of that week, because I usually do, pre-produced videos on Mondays and Wednesdays. So I'll usually do, especially if I have I know I have a long, more involved video for Wednesday, I'll do something simpler for Monday, and I'll shoot it the same day that I shoot the Trek Actually video. And then usually edit it first, because editing it will take a much shorter amount of time, and then I'll edit the Trek Actually video until it's done. And usually the Trek Actually video that goes up on Wednesday is finished and ready to be uploaded either Monday night or Tuesday morning, or if I'm really pushing it, Tuesday afternoon of that week. So yeah, it's a pretty involved process, and it's a pretty labor-intensive process. In terms of how long do I ruminate over an idea? Again, that just depends. With any video, whether it's a political video or one of my sketches where I play multiple characters, or a Star Trek video or whatever, some of them, it's I've just got it in my brain in an almost fully formed state, and it just comes out of my fingers, and there it is. And when it's done, it's done. And I'm like, that's it. I'm doing that. Right. And boy, if they could all be like that, that would be great. But sometimes it's more of a painstaking process. I'm working on one that I'm probably going to try to have ready for Monday, that I thought I finished writing it yesterday, but then I was thinking about it today, and I came up with some more stuff for it, and I was adding to it today, and I was reading it out loud and kind of going over it and thinking, okay, does this sound right? What about this? Can I add this? There was at one point I was going to add a section to it, and then I decided not to. So it really depends on the video. It depends on the project. Sometimes it's I don't have to ruminate on it at all. I'm just oh, that's it. And sometimes I have to sit there and stare at a blank document for a while, or just leave it alone and get up and walk around and watch TV or cook or do something else. And, it'll come to me, and I'll realize what it is, and I'll be like, okay, that's it. That's my way in. That's my point. That's what I want to do. There you go. And then I can come sit down and write it. And sometimes it comes in sections, or I'll write it and I'll think it's done, and then I'll come back to it and I'll be like, actually, I have a better idea for this. And, I can fix this, and I can do this and this, and I'll take this out and it'll work better. It really depends on the project. But thank you for asking. I hope that was illuminating. Joe McClory, I found myself in a weird position the other day, seeing Biden on the UAW strike line. I think I was actually proud of the president for the first time in far too long. Not only did he show up to a strike and say the right things, but more importantly, he gave the mic to Sean Fain and let him speak truth to power on a much larger stage than he normally would have had. Biden needs to do better, but I am often surprised how much better he is than I expected he would have been. Is this the sort of presidency that you expected him to have, or has Biden been more or less progressive than you thought? Also, if no one else brought it up, good job, WGA. Unions work. Absolutely, unions work, and that's why the bosses are desperate to kill them, because they work. That's why their bosses don't want workers to join unions, because unions fucking work. I think we're more or less on the same page. There are many ways in which I really wish Biden would do better. He has not been a perfect president. He has not been an ideal president by any stretch of the imagination. But he has, in certain ways, he has exceeded my expectations. I kind of expected when he got in there, because I thought his platform was very, very progressive. And I told people that going into it. I was like, go to the website, read the platform. It's a really progressive platform for people saying like, Biden, he's a centrist. He's basically just a Republican. Like, no, read what he wants to do. That's not a Republican platform. That's not a centrist platform. That is a very, very progressive platform. So I figured he would be a fairly progressive president, but what I expected was that he would try to do a bunch of stuff. He would introduce some bills. He would give some speeches encouraging Congress to do this or that. And very little of it would get done because Republicans would filibuster and would block stuff, and, that his actual progress would be limited. And that has more or less been what has happened, unfortunately. But what surprised me, and what continues to surprise me in a very good way, is how hard Biden has worked to try and do as much as he can with his authority as president without exceeding that authority. That has really, like, for instance, the student loan thing. I have been very impressed by the fact that he will not let the student loan forgiveness thing go. He tried to do a student loan forgiveness thing that the Republicans came after him for, and it got blocked by the courts, and they said, no, you can't do that. So then he tried to do it another way, and he has continued to try and do anything he can as president, using the power that he has, that he does not have to go to Congress for, to pass a law or something, just his executive authority. He's tried to do as much as he could and tried multiple ways to try and get some form of student loan forgiveness or student loan relief to be realized. And that has really impressed me. And you can be cynical and say, well, he's doing it as a campaign issue. He's doing it to court voters and to say, hey, I'm the one who tried to forgive your student loans, or, reelect me and give me a Democratic majority in both houses of Congress, and then I can forgive your student loans or whatever. Yeah, you can always take a cynical view of it, and maybe that's true. But nevertheless, like, he has repeatedly tried to do things that would make a significant positive difference in the lives of millions of people. And even though he was thwarted at it, he didn't just give up and say, well, I gave it a shot. They say I can't do it. Like, he went back to the drawing board and tried again. And that really impressed me and really endeared him to me. And even though seeing him go on the picket line with the auto workers, that was fantastic. And as I mentioned, in the previous question, talking about his bona fides as a union president, I mean, he stood on the picket line alongside the workers. As you said, he passed the bullhorn to the president of the union, Shawn Fain, and gave him his platform. And he is an unapologetic supporter of the union. And I think that's great. And I really love him for that. So yeah, he does need to do better in a lot of ways, and he still is not my ideal president or my first choice, but he has succeeded my expectations in some surprising ways. Yes, definitely. Stephen G. Clenard. Hey, Steve, Senator Dianne Feinstein has died. This temporarily gives the Republicans a majority in the Senate until California can appoint a new senator to replace her. It remains to be seen what damage the GOP can do to our democracy during this time, but I wouldn't put anything past them. This problem was avoidable, given her age and health. She was at high risk of incapacitation or death at her last election. If not for the intervention of her aides, she was incapable of performing her duties for the last year. Call me ageist, but the stakes are too high to put high-risk individuals in positions where their death could mean the end of our democracy. President Biden seems to be in good health, but at his age, the risk of a serious health incident before the election frightens me. What can and should the Democratic Party do to limit this risk? Age limits are pretty harsh, but Feinstein never should have been a candidate in her last election. Am I being an ageist asshole? I don't think you're being, I guess there is an element of ageism to what you're saying, unavoidably, but I don't think your problem is with how old they are. Your problem is with the risk factors associated with age and the fact that they are in incredibly important positions in our political system in a particularly precarious era. So I don't think you're being all that unreasonable. I mean, I don't support age limits. I support term limits. And it would, I mean, I suppose if we imposed like rigid, I mean, fucking draconian term limits on senators and members of Congress, that might fix the problem, because unless somebody runs for Congress for the first time when they're in their mid to late 70s, you would think we probably wouldn't have that many, you know, septuagenarian or octogenarian members of Congress or presidents or vice presidents, because term limits would necessarily see to it that most, if not all, politicians were moved out of public office, at least at the federal level, after, you know, a couple of decades at the very most. So, you know, I think that could fix things, as opposed to just setting an age limit and saying, once you hit 70, you're out of here. But what really would make a difference is just more of a sense of selflessness and responsibility on the part of our elected officials. You know, as Oasis mentioned in their question a little while ago, I mean, Dianne Feinstein had a great and admirable career in the United States Senate. She deserves to be remembered fondly by people on our side and by anybody who gives a shit about things like women's rights and gun control and all of the issues that she was a force in. She deserves to be remembered appreciatively for what she accomplished. And it's too bad that her last few years could potentially leave a negative impression with people, instead of her long career of fighting for progressive causes. But that's the way it is, because she hung on too long. And I don't know why Dianne Feinstein wanted to continue to be a senator in her upper 80s and early 90s. I don't understand why she wanted to do that. I don't understand why she didn't feel comfortable stepping away and saying, my work is done. I've done my part. Now I'm going to retire and enjoy the remaining years of my life in comfort. I don't know why she didn't do that, but I wish she had. And I wish more people in her situation would, and I think it's calling upon our leaders, calling upon our elected representatives to have more of a sense of responsibility and say, look, you've done good work. You've served your country. You've built a legacy to be proud of. You've improved the lives of your constituents. You are in your 80s now. You've had a good run. Why don't you go home and let somebody else take it from here? And hopefully have them be receptive to that and have them say, you know what, you're right. I've done my bit. I've made my mark. It's time for me to go and to turn this over to someone else. If that was more of a prevalent attitude, I think we wouldn't have this sort of problem. But, how do you fix that? Like, how do you make that a prevalent attitude? I don't know. A tired and exhausted some random geek. Quick reminder that since it is payday, or at least it is for me, give money you can afford to Joanna, Phoenix, Joey, and Jason Harding. And thank you for including Jason in that, by the way. They all really need it, and all of their links are in the charity links page, charitylinks.page. Now to my question. That was some hangout last Sunday. Just comply with those in power and things will be all right. Just saying. A lot has already been said about that statement, but it does concern me how common that attitude is, because it legitimizes those positions of power without those positions of power legitimizing themselves. Just comply with insert whatever, the cop, God, the king, your slave master, your boss. Remember that Me Too is a labor movement, and many seem to be firm believers in things like, we need cops in society to protect us from criminals, or being a firm believer in, there are always hierarchies, as one liberal yelled at me. Then what chances do socialists have of dismantling capitalism when many believe just comply and it will be fine? The point that you make in that I really connect with is the idea of those in power legitimizing themselves. Because I do think that is something that we really need to be demanding of the people that we elect, or in the case of cops, the people that we sort of allow to have this position. I mean, I think I made this point during that hangout that, you know, unless it's like an office like a sheriff or something, a lot of sheriffs are elected, but for the most part, cops are not elected officials. But nonetheless, we as a society have imparted this authority to them and said, okay, we're going to allow you to do things that the rest of us are not allowed to do. But the reason that we're allowing you to do this is that in theory, you're supposed to be performing a service for the rest of us. You're supposed to be maintaining law and order in a fair, just way, not in, you know, an unjust way, as is too often the case. We're giving you this power because you're supposed to be making things better for the community, right? You're supposed to be enforcing the laws in a fair and just and equitable way. You're supposed to be not exceeding the boundaries of your authority or using your authority as a weapon to bully people or to throw your weight around or to protect yourselves from accountability when one of you fucks up. That's not the deal. The deal is we give you this authority and then you use it for our benefit to help us. That's the deal. And if you can't do that, then we will either give that authority to some other group, or maybe, if possible, work out some way of doing this where nobody has that authority, where we'll try something completely different. And I feel like that is an attitude that we have to have. Whatever specific solution we land on in terms of police reform, I feel like that's the attitude we have to have. It's not, we shouldn't have to justify ourselves to the people in power. The people in power, whether they are elected or not, if they are in positions of public service, they legitimize themselves to us, not the other way around. And that really needs to be the attitude. And, you know, just comply cuts completely against that. I mean, I think someone mentioned, someone brought up the military in that hangout and mentioned, you know, in a lot of cases, civilian cops or non-military cops behave in ways that you couldn't behave in if you were a member of the military. Like you couldn't get away with the shit. Actual soldiers aren't allowed to do the shit that cops get by with. And there's another element to that as well, which is, you know, if you say on one, you can say like, you know, cops can't, I've completely lost it. I had another point to make and it was another comparison between cops and in the military and it just completely flew out of my head. But yeah, anyway, I mostly agree. I know we part company because you're an anarchist and I'm not, and I am more dubious of, well, let's just get rid of cops solutions than you might be. But I share the belief that we definitely need to do something. We definitely need to do some kind of major reform to policing in this country, and telling people to just comply. Oh, I know what it was. Soldiers in the military are permitted to refuse what they believe to be immoral orders, which I think somebody might have brought up in the hangout as well. They don't, like, a soldier doesn't have to just comply. Now, most of the time you're supposed to, but if you believe your commanding officer is ordering you to do something that is immoral, that is, and specifically that is against the code of justice, you don't have to do it. I mean, there's going to be an investigation. You're going to have to account for yourself. Like, you're going to have to show that you were within your rights to refuse the order. You can't just do it and then it's over with. But you have the right as a soldier to refuse to follow what you consider to be an immoral order or an unreasonable order. And if a soldier has that right in the rigid ranks of the military, surely a civilian with a presumption of innocence and constitutional rights has the right to refuse to comply with a cop if they feel that the cop is giving them an unreasonable order, right? And even if you believe that compliance is the best thing to do when confronted with a cop, even when the cop is being overbearing and unreasonable, surely even then we have to draw a line and say, yeah, but cops still aren't allowed to kill people with no reason. Cops still aren't allowed to be abusive. Cops still aren't allowed to exceed the boundaries of their authority. Like, You know, even if you believe, well, yeah, just comply. Okay, but cops still aren't allowed to kill people, though, right? You know, so yeah, the whole thing. It doesn't. I am definitely not on the side of just comply. Everything will be fine, because, and as a lot of people in the Hangout pointed out as well, that's not true. It's just empirically not true. Just comply and everything will be fine is not true, because a lot of people who have been injured and killed by cops unjustifiably did comply, or were trying to comply, and still got killed or harmed in a way that, you know, changed their lives. So yeah, no, just comply is bullshit. Thomas James Wright, hey Steve, hope all is well. As a proponent of studying currency-free economic systems, I find myself uncovering more and more economic dynamics that continue to reveal the very counterproductive, damaging, and insane nature of money. And I have developed a very grounded, scientific, and fact-driven disdain for this stuff. 6 years of studying its connection to nearly every negative aspect of the modern human experience has a way of doing that. Still, I'm in a position of needing more and more of it to further my research and hopefully get a few papers published in the near future. I need it, yet I loathe it. The cognitive dissonance involved is unreal. I'm finding it more and more difficult to set my unease aside when it comes to using, in my opinion, the most lethal and debilitating poison humanity has ever developed, just to be able to show others how poisonous it really is. It's kind of a fucked up situation. Any words of wisdom or inspirational thoughts you might share on the matter? By any means necessary. How about that? I mean, I understand what you're going through. I see the point you're making. It makes complete sense to me. You didn't create the system. You don't have the option to just not use money. Like, it is the system that we are stuck with until somebody comes up with a better one, and until we figure out a way of implementing the better one, you know. So there's like a two-stage process. Okay, we don't like the current system. What are we going to replace it with? Okay, that sounds like that might work. How are we going to do that? You know, those are two pretty big problems to get past. And until we do that, we're all in this same shitty system, and that's not your fault. You didn't choose it. You're not responsible for it. And there's nothing you as an individual can do to change it. But you can contribute to change by doing the work you're doing, by doing the research, by, as you said, maybe getting some papers published, maybe raising some awareness about the problems and about the possible solutions. Like, the work you're doing, even though you are forced to participate in this destructive system in order to do it, the work you're doing is good and will hopefully lead to positive outcomes down the road, right? So I would try to keep my mind on that. I totally understand what your problems are and why the cognitive dissonance, as you say. Like, I totally understand where the difficulties are coming from. Makes perfect sense to me. But I would say try to focus on the fact that you didn't choose this system. You are trying to raise awareness about it and hopefully contribute to changing it. And that's a good thing. And focus on that. And maybe, if possible, try to let yourself off the hook a little for your unavoidable participation in the shitty system while you're doing that. Dana the Perpetually Exhausted. Happy Friday, Steve. Social media is a no-no on the clock, so I didn't find out about Senator Feinstein's death until I got home. It got me thinking about a few different things. First of all, RBG. What is it about the more progressive-ish politicians not setting up a few good options for replacing them and then retiring? Sheesh. And then there's the whole Republican majority in the Senate. Guess it's good the Dems didn't get rid of the filibuster, eh? On a scale of potato to Steve Shives actually turns to prayer because it's clear that there's zero chance we're going to get ourselves out of the hole we keep digging deeper, how screwed would we have been if the filibuster had been yoinked? Yeeted? Not sure of the proper terminology. Oh, and since I'm not at my character limit, do you support police abolition, and why do you, or what faults does the failure to do so reveal in your character? Have a fabulous evening. Heart emojis to all who'd like them. I don't know why it seems to be more of a progressive thing than a conservative thing. Because conservatives just want to retire and enjoy the money. And maybe Democrats and progressives are led astray by like a misfiring of their desire for public service and selflessness. They're like, no, I must stay in the Senate in order to continue doing good, you know, whereas a Republican would be like, I made my money, I'm out of here. But as you know, I don't think we would have been in any danger because Biden is still the president. Now, if Biden was not the president, if we had a Republican president and Feinstein died and there was a gap before her replacement could be seated, and the Republicans briefly had a majority in both houses, and a president who would probably sign whatever they passed, and there was not a filibuster for the Democrats to block it, yeah, then we might be in a little bit of trouble for however long that was. But fortunately, we have the filibuster, and even if we had gotten rid of the filibuster, we still have Biden as president, and he's not going to sign any crazy shit that the Republicans pass. So I don't think we're actually in any danger, even if we would have gotten rid of the filibuster. As for police abolition, no, I don't support full police abolition. I do not support, well, let's just get rid of police and just not have police, because I just don't think that's practical. I can't imagine how that would work. I can imagine doing policing in a very, very different way than we do it now. I am a huge supporter of not arming police, or at least of not arming standard patrol cops. I think if we did our police similar to how they do police forces in Europe, especially in the UK, where the average cop on the street is not walking around packing heat, traffic cops are not walking around packing heat. They have specialized teams of cops that carry firearms and are trained to use them, that are sent out to respond to specific situations that demand that kind of armed response. But generally speaking, you know, like if a cop is just driving around on the highway, you know, pulling over speeders and writing tickets, why does that guy need a fucking gun? He doesn't. So I'm a huge proponent of not having cops be armed just as a matter of course. I think that would make a big difference. I'm totally in favor of doing things that several cities have done, where they basically shut down the entire police department and fire everybody and then start over from scratch. I think that's a good thing and a necessary thing in a lot of cases. I think it would be a good idea for a lot of cities to do that, to just say, you know what, fuck it, we're starting over. And we're going to try to do it right this time. But I don't see how you can have the way our society is laid out, how large so many of our communities are. We have even a small town in the United States. Like my hometown of Hagerstown is considered a small town. It's got a population of 40-some thousand people. That's still a lot of people. I don't know how you can have an orderly, peaceful, community of 40,000 people who will not always all be on the same page and will not always agree with each other, and will even sometimes occasionally do grievous harm to each other, and not have some kind of police force or something like it in place to handle that. No, I do not support police abolition. I support radically rethinking and changing the way we carry out policing. But I don't see how it works just saying, no more cops, we're just not going to have police anymore. I don't see how that'll work. John Burns says, so the Canadian Speaker of the House of Commons has resigned because he didn't do research on a person who fought for a rather infamous Nazi unit for the Ukraine in World War II against the Soviet Union. Anthony Rata makes me happy that Queen Elizabeth II wasn't alive to witness this. There didn't appear to be any vetting by the Liberal government. All the political seals in the House applauded twice. Also in attendance, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Excellence of execution. Thoughts? I appreciate the Bret Hart reference. Yeah, that whole thing seems like just a shit show. I mean, I heard about that and I was like, how does that happen? And I mean, you mentioned it, you say it in the question, like they didn't do their homework. They didn't check into the guy enough. I guess they wanted to have someone that they thought was a Ukrainian hero to be their because Zelensky was in town, and that's understandable, but fuck, they picked the wrong guy. Like they picked the wrong guy, and there's no excuse for it. You know, and yeah, the Speaker of the House of Commons probably should have resigned for that if he was responsible for it. I mean, there's no excuse. There's no excuse for that. And yeah, it's a head shaker. It's like, oh God, seriously? Like, how was that allowed to happen? Russell says, hey, Steve, you are well. I am. Thank you, Russell. I think you probably meant to say, hope you are well. I'm playing it safe this week. In 2 weeks, I may ask the really tough question. But for today, I will stick with Deep Space Nine with spoilers. Sorry, anyone who hasn't seen the whole show yet. But something caught my eye during my rewatch. When exactly was Bashir replaced? I only ask because in the episode Begotten, Odo becomes whole again. I'm sure you take my meaning. Was this part of the founder's plan or an error on the writer's part? Normally, this wouldn't be an issue, but given the events of Season 6 and the female changeling and Odo's relationship, it does bear further examination. If it was part of their plan, it would make sense that the female changeling would say, we have forgiven you. Anyways, I was curious on your read of that scene. I'll see you shortly. Hope you're having a good day. I think the Bashir being a changeling thing was probably something that they came up with. And I don't know the story behind this. I haven't read the behind the scenes stuff. So if anybody has read the behind the scenes stuff and wants to correct me on this, feel free to. But just from watching the show, it feels like that plot point was something that they came up with relatively soon, you know, before they put that in the show. Like, it doesn't feel like something they planned out years in advance. It feels like that was a twist that they came up with when they were preparing that episode, or maybe those few episodes, and they thought, oh boy, this will be a shocker. And then they went back at what they had already written or what they had already shot, and they said, okay, does this fit? Can we get away with this? And they decided, yes, they can get away with it. It might be a little awkward. It might raise a few questions, but they were willing to live with it, and they went with it. That's the impression I get from that plot development. So do I think it was planned when they wrote an earlier episode where Odo gets his changeling powers back? And if we do the math, the Bashir in that episode is actually not really Bashir. Does that mean anything? Does that make any sense? I don't think there was any conscious intention for that to be, you know, to do it that way. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But it doesn't really... I don't know if you could call it an error on the writer's part. I think it was just they came up with something on the fly and they decided to see if they could make it work, and they tried to make it work. And for the most part, I think they did. And if you look at it in hindsight, you can sort of say, wait a minute, if he was that then what about that? And there are things that kind of don't make as much sense, but you know, it's a TV show and it is what it is. And I think for the most part, they got away with it. It does introduce a few questions and a few complications that maybe they didn't intend, but ultimately it's not that big of a deal to me when I watch the show. It doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the show. So yeah, I don't really think it's that big of a deal. And last question from Andrew Michael. Missed asking a question. Damn. Just a quick one. I disagree with a lot of your takes on media and entertainment, but in all the ways that matter, your integrity, your morality, your acceptance, the list goes on, I am 100% with you. You're a good man, Steve, and I'm proud to know you. That's less a question and more of an ass kissing, but I pay the YouTube membership. I can say what I want. Thank you very much. That means a lot for you to say that. And you know, like, there are a few people that I know, you know, through doing this, through YouTube or whatever, who, like, I mostly agree with on things, but we'll have a disagreement. Like, for instance, with you or with David or with Jesse Gender over Lower Decks, right? Like, you know, you guys love Lower Decks. I say Lower Decks is not for me. We disagree on that. There are times when David is talking about Strange New Worlds that I think, what the fuck show is he watching? Where does he get this from? And we have a very strong disagreement on that. But at the end of the day, I know that we respect each other. I know that I think that you're good people. You have your heads screwed on right. You're caring, kind, decent people who are trying to make the world a better place and are trying to live moral and accepting and, lives that will add positively to the experience of the people that cross your path and the people that you share your lives with. And that's what is the most important thing, not whether or not we all like the same TV show. And if you think of me that way, then that does my heart good, and that means a lot to me. So thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you all know what time it is now, don't you? Well, it's almost time for me to spend the rest of the show talking to everybody in the live chat. But before we do that, before I turn to the live chat, there is one last bit of business. And that would be the business of showing you a brand new Stuffy and Friends short, which I am about to do. So this is a brand new Stuffy and Friends short. It's about a minute long. It will debut as a standalone YouTube short on this channel tomorrow. But because you are watching the live stream, you get to see a sneak peek of it tonight. Please enjoy the brand new Stuffy and Friends short.
If boys go to Mars to get more candy bars, and girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider, where do non-binary people go? And why?
What's the next planet after Jupiter? Saturn?
Saturn.
NBs go to Saturn to keep up the pattern? I don't like it either. Just acting according to an established pattern doesn't seem like a very NB thing to do.
Let me check Rhyme Zone. NBs go to Saturn to get more slattern?
Slattern means a slovenly woman, and it has traditionally been used to insult sex workers.
Okay, but that's only 2 strikes.
Why do girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider?
Because boys came up with the rhyme?
That tracks. NBs go to Saturn to open up a tavern?
That's the one.
Where's the tavern open?
There you have it. I like that one. I mean, I'm the guy who made it, so it's cheap. Self-praise is cheap praise, but I like that one. Anyway, to the live chat. Hi, everybody. David says, hey, take that back. I don't respect myself at all. Okay. Well, then to hell with you. David C. Drake says, the only take from Steve and Jason that has seriously surprised me is that neither of them loved Andor. It's like, come on, we finally have good adult Star Wars. Enjoy and celebrate it. I just thought it was boring. For the most part, I mean, there were, I believe I said there were a few episodes of it that I did think were brilliant. Like when it was good, it was really fucking good. But a lot of it was just perversely uneventful. Like entire episodes would go by where nothing fucking happened. And I think I've told this story before. There was an episode, it was during the prison arc. I think it was the middle of the prison arc when Andor was in the prison. And like the episode ends with this really dramatic, like push in shot of Andor, on the assembly line working on making those components for, whatever they were making. And like, it does this really dramatic push into Andor doing the thing. And then it cuts to black and that's the end of the episode. I fucking laughed out loud because I thought, holy shit. I just sat here for like an hour and watched this show and nothing fucking happened. Nothing fucking happened. But like I say, when it was good, it was good. Like the heist episode was terrific. The prison break episode was terrific. And I thought the last episode of the season was very good too. So, I mean, when it hit it really good. I thought it was terrific, but it's just like there are flashes of brilliance separated by extended tedium. And I'm just like, why are we sitting here watching this? And why isn't this show about Luthen? But anyway. I do have super chats. Oh, thank you, Geek. I will take a look at those. All right. So here's a super chat from Stephen Clenard. It says, regarding Feinstein, Some of the blame lies on California voters. Our wacky primary system means we choose between two Democrats, so we had a better alternative in the general. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that would make sense. But even so, I mean, like, Di-Fi should have stepped aside. Again, I don't want to, as Oasis said in the earlier question, I mean, she has a tremendous career that we should not lose sight of, but she should have retired. She should have stepped down. And here's a super chat from Isaiah Taylor. Next Ask Away, I'm going to challenge you, Steve. What do you get when you take General Colin Powell, time travel, the 1991 Gulf War, and the Enterprise D? Wow. I'm going to guess some fanfic. Knit and Crochet Tiger says, wow, does Steve like anything Star Wars other than the original trilogy? Yes, absolutely. I loved The Last Jedi. I liked The Force Awakens, but I loved The Last Jedi. I loved the first season of The Mandalorian. I mean, that's about it. And those couple episodes of Andor that I just mentioned, I thought those were excellent. But so yeah, I mean, I do like the original trilogy is where my heart lies with Star Wars. But no, I have enjoyed parts of it beyond. Oh, and Rogue One, I liked Rogue One. So there you go. There are Star Wars things beyond the original trilogy that I have genuinely enjoyed. But there's also a lot of it that I have either not enjoyed or have just been mostly kind of indifferent to. 2-5AD says, I made a purely speculative fiction Reddit post about Bigfoot. Someone responded, he's seen hundreds of big feet, and they're Nephilim from the Bible. What do you say to that person? Nothing. That person is not worth having a conversation with. I can't think of anything I could say to him that would not be either just flat out insulting or cruelly mocking them. So if I didn't want to just insult someone or make fun of someone in a really vicious way, I just wouldn't say anything, because that's a deeply, deeply unintelligent, let's just say, thing to say. Yes, there are hundreds. First of all, they're either sorely mistaken or they're seriously delusional if they actually believe they've seen hundreds of big feet. And if they say that they are Nephilim, then they're some kind of religious fanatic. I would not speak to that person. Seth Jones says, the company I work at is currently fighting the UAW. At what point am I working for the baddies versus just working for a corpo? When there are no good companies, what's one to do? I think you need to do what you need to do to survive. I don't think, look, if the best job that you can get is, at a company that is anti-union, like, that sucks. But if that's the best you can do, or if that's or in some cases, if that's like the only viable option that you have, then, I don't think there's any shame in doing that. It's a shitty world sometimes. And, if you are forced into making a shitty decision, I think it's good to be mindful of that. It's good to be aware of the position you're in and the type of company you're working for and the type of work you're doing. You don't need to be like making excuses and justifying it. But I don't think if it's a situation that you would not have chosen if there were a better alternative, then I don't think you need to be kicking yourself in the ass too hard over it either. David Colby says, I've been playing StarCraft, a video game, and it has a very Borg-like species in it called the Zerg, save that they're purely biological. And man, I want the Zerg to join Starfleet. I want more extremely weird aliens in Starfleet. I want them to be weird. I would be okay with that. I mean, as much as I enjoy the Star Trek convention of all the aliens basically just being humans with funny ears or funny foreheads, like, I really, really enjoy that. And I would not be hurting myself to change that if I were running a Star Trek show, because I feel like that's a feature, not a bug. But at the same time, there have been occasions where Star Trek shows have ventured outside of that. And I can't remember what they're called, but they're in season 2 of Discovery. I almost had it and I lost it. I can't remember what they're called, but the species that dominates Saru's species on Kaminar, the ones that basically use the Kelpians for food, right, and have tricked them into thinking that this is their purpose and that they have no lives beyond a certain age because that's when they're harvested for food, right? I can't remember their names, but when we actually see them, you know, they're very different from other Star Trek aliens that we've seen. They have this really sort of like nightmarish, like horror movie character design. They're like these black things that are almost they're like creatures out of a nightmare or something, and it's a really cool character design, and it's very atypical of Star Trek aliens. You know, it's not just guys in pajamas and funny makeup. And I really the Ba'ul, yes, and yes, you're right, Azalea, they're comically sinister, absolutely. The Ba'ul, I love them, and you know, they are very different from typical Star Trek aliens, and I like them a lot. David's writing a really annoying Lower Decks bit in the chat. Steve Schmeling says, about your Klingon vid, I believe that's bullshit is actually Vuch Klugtak. Vuch Klugtak. Because I can make shit up too. I love it. You just made it up. It's not Guj Fekluk. It's Guj Klugtak. Whatever. Well, okay then. You know what would be great? You know what's the best part? If I was running a Star Trek show, it would be both. It would be both. It would be whatever somebody said at the time. That's what it is. Because who gives a shit? Not me. And if I was running the show, that would be the rule. 255 AD says, I said, believe you. I believe you. I'm not being sarcastic. And it took him a whole day to realize I actually was being sarcastic. Well, there you go. That's a that's a good response. Kirak 2011, Stuffy needs a morpher. Yeah, what would Stuffy's Dinozord be if he was like an old school original, like, you know, first generation Power Ranger? What would Stuffy's Dinozord be? The Baul look at it's a similar, it's reminiscent of Armus, but I think they're a lot more sinister than Armus. Like Armus, you can tell when you see Armus. I think part of it was the lighting, because Armus was on a normally, like, an evenly lit 1980s TV set, so it's obviously just a guy in a suit with a bunch of oil sludge poured over him, right? Like he looks a little scary, but you can tell, like, that's just a guy in a suit. The Ba'ul, because of the lighting, because of the setting, you know, it's a similar kind. They have an Armus-like thing going on, but it's way beyond Armus to me. Wasn't there was somebody a Stegosaurus? I thought there was a Stegosaurus. Or no, or was it Triceratops? Let me see. There was Tyrannosaurus. There was Pterodactyl. There was Triceratops. There was saber-toothed tiger. And what was the other one? Was it a Stegosaurus? There was a Stegosaurus, wasn't there? I can't remember. It's been a while. Triceratops. Stuffy would be the Blue Ranger, so he would be the Triceratops. Okay. Well, yeah, because the original Blue Ranger left after the first season anyway, didn't he? Didn't the original Blue Ranger leave? Wasn't he like the first one to leave of the originals? So Stuffy could have stepped in and taken his place. David says, it's actually the worst kind of Lower Decks. It's a reference to where two humans who are rednecks hit a Zergling with their car. You just hit some poor sucker's dog, Sarge. Sure, okay. See, I don't actually get that specific reference, so I'm not really all that annoyed by it. Steve Schmeling says, also about your Klingon vid, what, no love for Torg? And Torg was Krug's first officer, right? I mean, he doesn't really do anything, but he gets yelled at by Krug, doesn't he? Isn't he the guy? He's the guy that Krug, after Krug kills his gunner for accidentally blowing up the Grissom, Torg is the one who's about to say something, and Krug like wheels around on him and points the disruptor at him. He's like, "Say the wrong thing, Torg." That's Torg, right? Yeah, I mean, other than that, he doesn't really do anything. So, like, you know, no disrespect to Torg, but like, there's not a lot to say about him. He's like, oh, there's Torg, I guess. Kurek 2011 with a member message. I think after today's stream, I will in 2 weeks comment on some media stuff that currently happened and give my last effort to give my final argument on my thoughts on cops and capitalism. Okay, well, I look forward to it. Good luck. David Colby says, I don't know, Steve. I've never watched Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. All I know about it, I know by watching the insanely long retrospectives by Linkara for some reason. I don't know why. Yeah, I've never watched those. I watched the actual show. Actually, you know what's funny is I was never really like, I wasn't a regular viewer of it either. Most of what I remember of it is because I used to watch it with my little brother. Because when the show started, I was just a little too old to fall into the target audience. I think when the show started, I was like maybe 14 or 15, something like that. Because the show it started in the mid 90s, right? It started in like 94, maybe 95. So I was just a little too old to be into Power Rangers. But my brother was right there in the middle of the target audience, and he loved it. He was a huge Power Rangers fan. So I would sometimes watch it with him, and I kind of got into it a little bit in spite of myself. But I didn't watch like every single episode, and I don't have any kind of like, you know, I can remember certain things about it, but I don't have the kind of recall of it that I would have for a show like that I actually watched. Like I remember way more about like the X-Files or MacGyver or something like that, a show that I was actually into, that I remember about Power Rangers. But I do remember a lot of it, and sometimes like for some of the jokes I did about it. Like in the review I put up yesterday where there were some Power Rangers jokes, I saw her doing this, right? And I thought, oh, that's like when they're morphin'. It's morphin' time, you know, when they hold out their little thing. And I had to look up what it was called. I didn't know off the top of my head that it was called a dynomorpher. I was like, what do they call that? And I found the Power Rangers wiki, and I looked up the right term, and I was like, okay, it's a morpher, so that's what I can call it in my joke, you know. And I remember like Amy Jo Johnson yelling, pterodactyl. You know, so I remember that, and I remember little details like that, and I can be reminded of them if I see something similar. But usually with Power Rangers, I have to actually go and look some stuff up and do some research to get enough specific stuff to, you know, to actually do a reference, because I don't have it right off the top of my head. Yeah, I guess he did take Torg getting blown up pretty hard, didn't he? He was, get out of there, because I think because Krug secretly wanted to kill him. Beyond Authentic Witchcraft says, just want to say a huge thanks for continuing to speak out for the trans community. As a trans Trekkie, I hate the hate within our community. Edict all the way. Well, I hate it too. It's a shame how many people who are fans of Star Trek don't actually watch and pay attention to Star Trek, you know? Because even before Star Trek, like, actually explicitly had trans characters or even queer characters of any kind, the overall message of the show has always been one of tolerance and acceptance and inclusion, and that diversity is a strength and something we should be working toward and embracing and not being shy of or embarrassed by or hostile towards. Like, that's been part of Star Trek from the very beginning. And to say that, well, I'm a Star Trek fan, but I hate having all these queer characters and I hate having all these brown characters and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's like, you could not be missing the point more. You could not be missing the point more. Oh, I love Krug too, man. Steve Schmeling says, I love Krug. He's so crazy. I love Krug. I hope that came across in my video. I love Krug. And yes, I saw that. How about this? Isn't this incredible news? They made an arrest in the killing of Tupac. Is that amazing? It's been like 27, 28 years. And they made an arrest in the killing of Tupac. That's, I mean, you know, especially for people who were 90s kids like me, like Tupac getting shot was a big fucking deal. And apparently they may have caught the guy who did it in 2023. Who the fuck would have ever thought? Oh, thank you, Geek. Geek says, this NB loves your latest Stuffy shirt. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you liked it. That one was hard to write because I could not think of what I like, because the whole thing is, boys go to Mars to get more candy bars. Girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider. Where do NBs go? So it's like a desire for inclusion, but you don't know where to go with it. And that's the joke of the piece. But I, as the writer, had no idea what it was either. I was like, and I had a couple different things that I was trying to work in, and I would write one, and then I would think, oh, but then how does it end? What's the punchline, you know? And then I came up with a bit for Jack to do, and I thought, that's it. You know, like I realized how I could include Jack in it and have his little gag with him, you know, being face first in the shot glass. And once I figured that out, I was like, aha, that's it. And I figured out, you know, I found a rhyme for it. You know, NBs go to Saturn to open up a tavern. And I was like, that's it. That's it. You know, and then I worked it until it was short enough to be a YouTube short. And that was it. But that of the stuff, a lot of the Stuffy shorts come really easy. And it's just like, oh, there's like one joke and I know how to get there. And I'm just like, and it's done, you know. But that one actually took some work. And I was very pleased with how it came out. So I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you liked it. I read your member message, Kirak. I'm just catching up in the chat, as you can tell. Steve Schmerling says, I remember Larroquette was at a televised Trek convention and said something in Klingon that he translated to, how do I look in this hat? Something that you would imagine a Klingon would say. Azalea, there you go. Give me an inverse TOS. All women of color except one token white guy, and they're all gay. You know, I replied to you, Geek, on Blue Sky about this, but Azalea saying that reminds me of what I said, because Geek said something in reply to one of my posts about the background character with the hijab in Lower Decks, and Geek said something like, I know they could make them all Muslim. I'd be fine with that. And I said, yeah, and you know, I do have like a contrarian streak in me where if I was writing a show like that and I saw that people were complaining about, you know, the representation of a visibly Muslim person in the show, my knee-jerk reaction would be to say, okay, well, guess what? They're all Muslims now. What are you going to do now? They're all Muslims because you complained. Fuck you. So, you know, you saying, like, give me an inverse TOS where it's all women of color except for one token white guy and they're all gay. I'm like, yeah, not only would that be cool just on its own, just as representation and as something different, right? But you know it would piss off the bigots in the fan base, and that is also a reason to do it. You know, the people that we would want to hate this are going to fucking hate this. And yet it is also a fantastic expression of the commitment to diversity and inclusion that the franchise was built on. So it's perfect. 255 AD says, in universe, do you think it's hypocritical of Starfleet to let someone wear a hijab but still forbid Bajoran earrings? Yes, but I don't care. Goes on to say, you know, the idea that there's no religion in Trek, do you think it's misguided to view getting rid of religion as a precursor to achieving social justice? I think it's misguided to view it as a necessary precursor. I think it's I think it's very simplistic to assume that that once society in general grows beyond religion, that will fix a bunch of other problems. I really don't think it will. I think if we somehow became a 100% atheist society and nobody believed in any gods and nobody practiced any religion anymore, we would still have racism and sexism and intolerance and xenophobia and, all of the various bigotries and inequalities that plague us. Religion often serves as an intensifier to those. Religion often provides bigots with justifications for their bigotry, and it creates institutions that can maintain that bigotry. So, religion does often make it worse, but people were bigots before they came up with religion. People were intolerant before they came up with religion, and certainly before they came up with the religions that are practiced for the most part in the world today. So getting rid of religion by itself might make certain things better, but the idea that it would, that if we got rid of religion, we would immediately be cured of all those associated ills. I don't think that is true. Some random geek says, are you a good friend to Jack refilling his shot glass or a bad friend for aiding his drinking habits? I'm a bad friend because I'm just doing that to keep him docile. I know that if he wants another drink and he doesn't get one, that we'll never hear the end of it. So for the sake of peace, I am enabling his habit, which is a bad thing to do. David Colby says, very short treks have given me a deep sense of empathy because I watch them and now I know what it is like for you watching Lower Decks. Because it was like having my toenails pulled off. And you know what's hilarious? Here's the thing. The two most recent ones of those have been the ones that I really, really haven't liked. I thought the one with the worst contact one, where Riker and Crusher beam down to make first contact with the aliens that just pick their noses and stuff. I kind of liked the ending to that, where Riker just turns around with his phaser and blows up their warp engine and says, oops, never mind. No, not necessary for first contact. Bye. Right? I thought that was kind of clever. But everything up to that was just death. Was just like, oh, God. And not because it was gross or anything, just because it was just like, they don't know where they're going with this, And the new one, the one that just came out this week, I thought it was awful. I thought it was fucking awful. And it was written by one of the co-creators of Star Trek Prodigy, who I know is an incredibly talented person. And of course, that's the one that everybody liked. All of the Trekkies that I follow and talk to and see on Twitter and social media and stuff, they haven't liked any of the very short treks until this one, which was just nothing but fucking fan service and references. It was like a miniature Lower Decks episode. And of course, that's the one that everybody thought was fucking great. Even though it didn't have a fucking ounce of wit to it. It was just, it's a holodeck, and now it's their holodeck, and now it's another. It was just a nested series of, and then the ending made no sense at all. And it was awful. It was fucking terrible. And of course, that's the one that was written by someone who I know is incredibly talented, and it's the one that everybody liked. And to me, it was far and away the worst one. So, your mileage may vary. Your mileage may vary. I will say, I do understand the objections that people had to the first one. The one, because, I don't think that was how that was intended. But when people pointed it out to me that you could read it as, white people or men or just privileged people in general complaining about, having to respect other people's identities. Like, I totally get that now that it's been pointed out to me. I guess it's a mark of my own privilege that I didn't get that immediately. But now that other people have said that, I've watched it again and I'm like, oh, okay, no, I totally see that now. But I still think, like, the bit near the end where Pete Holmes is like describing his fantasy woman, and he then goes off on this tangent about, he likes to play board games, he likes Risk, and she would like Risk too, and she would just let him keep Australia because he doesn't want to fight. He wants to make peace treaties, and why can't you do that? The game allows it, and how he finds 70s game shows comforting, like that whole like weird stream of consciousness tangent I thought was really funny. And then the timing of the punchline where she appears and she's about to give them the solution to get out of the jam, and he interrupts her by asking her to marry him, and the ship blows up. I thought it was well done. I thought the Spock one after that was well done up to the ending. I thought they didn't have an ending to it at all, so the ending to that one was not good, but up until that point, I thought it was really strong and really funny. But yeah, the nose picking one, and the most recent one where it's just holodeck stuff, just an excuse to make a bunch of witless, meaningless references to all the shows. I was just like, no, that's nothing. That's nothing. But of course, that's the one that everybody liked. Oh, Dana, did I? Oh, you mean what? Oh, what character flaws does it suggest that I have? I guess I'm a fucking bootlicker. I guess I'm too deferential to authority because I'm not a 100% abolitionist. Oh, Azalea, that is a good point. We'd still have billionaires without religion. Yes, we would. Eli Balin, the Bajaran earring ban made no sense considering that Worf had been wearing his beauty pageant sash on the bridge for years. A bunch of people in the comments to my various posts about this and to my video pointed that out. They cited Worf as an example of someone wearing like a ceremonial cultural piece of clothing that is not part of the standard uniform to show that, you know, someone wearing a hijab shouldn't be that big of a deal. But nobody has ever called it his beauty pageant sash. And I love that. I love that. Oh, I love it. Yes, Kirik, I consent. I consent to it. It's fine. You can ask whatever question you want to ask, man. 255 AD says, the other day I told a joke to a Twitch streamer where my dad said, I'm swatting more than a pedophile at a funhouse. I'm sweating more than I guess I'm sweating more than a pedophile at a funhouse. That's kind of funny, I guess. It's dark. And, you know, I know a lot of people have just a visceral negative reaction to anything that even references child molestation, which I understand. But I have a dark black heart that occasionally can laugh at jokes like that. We have some disagreements. Steve Schmeling says it was a hall monitor sash, which would be more appropriate to Worf. He is, I mean, no offense to him. I'm sure as far as Klingons go, he's a good looking dude. But he does read more as hall monitor than beauty queen to me. David Colby says, the funny thing is your description of your not police abolition sounds a lot like police abolition to me, since it requires such a fundamental change to how cops work. So it's fine. Well, there, see? David says it's fine. So anybody who has a problem with it can fuck off. That's what David said. And he even likes lower decks. So say something now. Thanks, Dave. Thanks a lot. So Random Geek says, I still really love the late seating episode of Perfect Blue Jason released 2 weeks ago. You two pointed out something I didn't see in the movie. Oh, really? I would love to know what it was. Beyond Authentic Witchcraft, which sash, season 1 or 2 onwards, because it changed. I think maybe the season 1 one that was like the leftover from TOS, the gold one with the little frills, that feels more beauty pageanty to me. But maybe Klingon beauty pageants, maybe the other one with the metal elements, you know, maybe that's more of a Klingon beauty pageant look, you know? Oh, here's an extra verse. Steve has written an extra verse for my Deja Q pastiche of, or my Deja Q satire, I guess, or parody song of That's Amore. An omnipotent guy that Worf wants to see die. It's Deja Q. Yeah, that works. I got you. That works. Ooh, okay, geek. The idea of fans and how they feel like they own the celebrity or are owned or are owed who they are. Really, you never noticed that before. Well, it's cool because yeah, I mean that jumped right out at me. But it's cool. I assume you've seen the movie a bunch of times. You've seen it way more than I have. So it's cool that we were able to, you know, give you something to look at that you had never noticed before. I'm glad that we achieved that. And Scrim says, where do you get the outfits for your figures? Are they custom orders? You mean these guys back here? No, they're not custom orders. Those are all, it's mostly the outfits that they came in. For some of them, They are costumes from other figures that I swapped because I decided when I started buying them to make my photo comics that I haven't had time to do for forever. I really would love to find some time to get back and make a few more of those because that's the whole reason why I got all those Star Trek figures was to make photo comics with them. And I've been so busy with other stuff, I haven't had a chance to do it for a very long time. But I made the decision that I wanted the comic to be set after Star Trek Nemesis, so all of the Starfleet characters would be wearing the Deep Space Nine style uniforms with the gray shoulder, the First Contact style uniforms with the gray shoulders and the colored undershirt, right? But not all of the action figures for the characters came in that uniform. A lot of them were like they had a TNG uniform or an earlier Deep Space Nine uniform where it was like the black jumpsuit with the colored shoulders and the gray undershirt. So in order to get everybody wearing the same kind of uniform, I would swap uniforms with other figures. So some of them are not wearing the same uniform that they came in, but they're all wearing uniforms that came with those figures. So none of them are like custom outfits. It's just I have customized them by putting them in different clothes to meet what I wanted to use them for. Super chat from Kirak 2011. I'm going to give you a small sample, Steve. Boy, you really can't wait to ask this question. Take Sipowicz versus a child rapist. Are you really telling me you don't get pleasure from watching Andy smacking the sick SOB to get the confession? Well, no, of course I do, but that doesn't mean cops should do that. Like that's really where I draw the line. Yes, of course I like seeing, a fictional character who, even though he is deeply problematic and has a lot of issues, is more or less one of the good guys, beat the shit out of a bad guy. Yes, of course I like to see that. I get a thrill out of that. But that doesn't mean I think real cops should be treating real suspects that way. Ever. I'll even go a step further. In real life, if I find out that a cop beat the fucking piss out of a child molester in real life, I'm not going to feel bad for that child molester. Fuck him. He deserves whatever he gets. To hell with him. I have not an ounce of sympathy for him. But that doesn't mean I think cops should be doing that. Like, do you see the difference? Like, I can say, look, the person who got it deserved what they got, and to hell with them, but still say, but this is not a procedure that I want law enforcement to be able to do. Like, this should be against the rules. This is against the rules for a reason. This is a bad thing in principle, and it should be something that is not allowed. It's just in this particular case, fuck that guy, right? David, I like how Kirak has to go to fiction for his example. Exactly. Well, 255 AD, I mean, it is totally inappropriate. It's totally inappropriate. But, I've told jokes and laughed at jokes that are grossly inappropriate too. So I can't, I can't be mad at you for it. What if a terrorist was going to explode 10 billion babies? Do you agree with torture now? Yeah, exactly. I mean, and yeah, there's a difference between fictional characters doing questionable things within the context of a story, and feeling some sense of satisfaction in seeing a fictional villain get a comeuppance, even if that comeuppance crosses some ethical boundary or moral boundary, and even a difference between that and reveling in the misfortune of a real person who had it coming. Like I said, if I find out that a cop beat the shit out of a child molester or beat the shit out of a Nazi or a rapist or something fuck that guy. I don't give a fuck. Fuck him. He do whatever you want to him. I don't fucking care. But if that cop then gets brought up on charges and gets, sent to prison for beating up the child molester, well, I mean, hey, you do the crime, you do the time, I mean, even though I don't feel bad for the person that got beat the fuck up. I think they had it coming. I also understand there's a very important reason why we don't allow cops to do that, and why we can't just let them get away with shit, even if the person they did it to totally had it coming and deserved it. And especially if, as is often the case, the person who had it happen didn't have it coming and didn't do anything to deserve it at all. Oh, Steve says True Q, one Wonder Years joke, no Conan the Destroyer or Law and Order SVU joke. Well, see, that is Wonder Years is my reference point for Olivia Dabo. Like, that's what I think of when I see her. So that's what I went with. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up the stream. I'm going to go through my my ending show spiel here. And so if anybody has any final questions or comments, you can go ahead and load them up in the chat. I'll take one last look in a minute after I get through this. First of all, don't forget charitylinks.page that Some Random Geek mentioned earlier, and also in their question, charitylinks.page, which includes the link to help out my best friend Jason Harding, and also the link to Jason's GoFundMe is in the description of this video. So if you can afford to help Jason out in his time of need with his heart condition, please, please, please do so. I highly encourage and ask you to do that. And if you can't afford to give, consider sharing the link around on your social media, and maybe some other folks will see it and will contribute. And of course, all the other folks, all of the friends of ours who have their links in charitylinks.page who need a helping hand. It doesn't have to be Jason. I'm saying Jason because Jason is my best friend, but there are unfortunately a lot of people who are in need, who have some need for financial assistance, and if you are in a position to offer it, I would highly encourage you to do so. So check out charitylinks.page, linked in the description of this video, and Geek is putting various links in the chat as we speak right now. Also, don't forget, if you enjoy what I do here on YouTube, you can become a supporter of this channel in a couple of ways. You can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, or you can become a channel member by just clicking the join button. Either way, if you become a patron or a member at any level, from $1 a month on up to whatever you can afford and whatever you think I'm worth, you get, as one of the perks, the ability to submit questions ahead of time for these Ask Away live streams. On the Monday before I do these Friday streams, I will send out a link to my various members only and patrons only feeds that you can click on, that will take you to the Google form where you submit your questions. And then those are the questions that I read and respond to in the first part of every episode of Ask Away. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, or if you would just like to support my work here on YouTube and help me to continue to do it and do more of it, I would highly encourage you and ask you to become a patron or a member. Patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button. Also, don't forget that in addition to YouTube, I am on a couple of excellent podcasts that are a part of the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. There is Late Seating, the movie review podcast that just had a new episode go up today. Our previous episode was about the classic anime film, Perfect Blue, that Geek was mentioning in the chat a few minutes ago. And our new episode is our review of the Alfred Hitchcock classic Rear Window. So if you want to hear Jason and I review Rear Window, you can hear that on the newest episode of Late Seating. And also, besides Late Seating, Jason and myself and the wonderful, charming, incredibly talented Dana Cole, who is also in the chat, all three are on another podcast that is a Star Trek themed comedy podcast called The Ensign's Log, where we star as characters who are serving aboard the TNG era Enterprise at the moment. We've had a couple of time shifts. We started in our first season, we started back in the TOS era, then we kind of jumped ahead, and our characters found themselves in the TNG era. But it's a really fun show. We love doing it, and we love hearing from those of you who listen to it and enjoy it as well. So if you like Star Trek, if you like funny Star Trek stuff, and you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, give it a shot. See if you enjoy it. It's linked in the description along with Late Seating. Check out the Let Me Listen family of podcasts. All right, let me take one last look at the chat here and see what we've got going on. Here's another super chat from Kirok. That's the problem with NYPD Blue. Most people have it coming, and it's fictional. But there are many people who are guilty of gross, inhumane treatment. And yes, I have no empathy for those people. That's all I'm saying. Okay, well, we agree on that. We agree on that. I don't feel bad for bad people when bad things happen to them. Like, we agree on that. But I still don't think cops should be doing that shit. Let me see here. Steve says, will you be doing fan submissions for Trek vids again, or are you done with that? I'm considering it. I might do it next year. I haven't decided. We'll see. TJ Walker says, hey, Steve. Hey, TJ. And bye, because we're almost done the stream, but glad you could make it. Yeah, David makes a good point. Monstrous people still shouldn't be handled in monstrous ways, for what it's worth. And I think I made that point in the stream. I mean, I don't believe in mistreating prisoners. I don't believe in mistreating criminal suspects as a rule. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, if something shitty happens to a shitty person, I don't feel bad for them. I do believe, as a rule, as a matter of course, we should treat people humanely when they are in police custody or when they're in the custody of the state as prisoners or whatever. We should treat them better than their behavior might dictate that they deserve to be treated, because I feel like that's the kind of society we should have. We should have a humane society that respects basic rights and doesn't go out of its way to abuse people, even people who have done terrible things. Like, that's what I think the baseline should be. That's what I think the rule should be. I think people who violate that rule should be punished and should be removed from a position where they could violate that rule again. But something shitty happens to a shitty person, I'm not going to cry about it. You know? And I honestly don't think those two things are contradictory. Anyway, well, that's, you know what, TJ, that's true. Which Steve were you talking to? You might have been talking to Steve Schmeling. And if so, then I apologize, and I retract my hello. You should have made it clear who you were talking to. And yeah, David Colby, you're right. There's too many Davids. And I think you should fight to the death. And you know what? I don't want to... It would be wrong of me to take sides in that battle, because you're all at my live stream. You're all in my chat. And I feel like I shouldn't step in. But David Colby, I would be rooting for you. Oh, and David, what's that over there? David C. Drake, I was just kidding. I would actually be rooting for you. So, anyway, that's it. Thanks for coming to the stream, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. And I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.